In the remote, fog-choked mountains of West Virginia lies Raven's Hollow, a place the world seems to have forgotten. Locals speak of a family that vanished into the shadows decades ago, leaving behind whispers of children who were never allowed outside. Their faces pale, their eyes hollow, and their laughter rare and chilling. Investigators who stumbled upon the property years later described it as a house frozen in time, where faded photographs, twisted furniture, and journals chronicling generations of inbreeding painted a horrifying portrait of a bloodline cursed by obsession and secrecy. What really happened in Raven's Hollow? Why were these children trapped, hidden from the sun and sky, raised only by the twisted rules of their family? As the story unfolds, you'll see a place where morality was forgotten, fear became a tool of control, and innocence was distorted into something unrecognizable. Every shadow in the house seemed alive. Every creak in the floorboards whispered secrets of forbidden rituals, missing children, and a darkness that refused to leave. Tonight, we dive deep into the story of these inbred children trapped forever, a tale that combines true crime, taboo horrors, and the eerie isolation of an American mountain town. Dare to follow the trail into Raven's Hollow, where the past lingers, and the truth is far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Raven's Hollow was not on any map, and few outsiders knew it existed. Hidden deep in the Appalachian mountains of West Virginia, the town was a cluster of decaying cabins and overgrown paths, shrouded in mist, nearly year-round. The locals who dared to speak of the Hollow whispered of the Whitmore family, a lineage whose origins were as old and twisted as the mountains themselves. Generations of inbreeding had warped the family's features and behaviors, creating a line of children who were isolated, frightened, and controlled from birth. Their ancestors, obsessed with maintaining the purity of their bloodline, instilled rigid rules and dark traditions, ensuring that the children never left the compound for fear of contamination or exposure to outsiders. By the late 20th century, the family had grown reclusive to the point of vanishing entirely from town life. No one had seen the children play outside, attend school, or interact with neighbors. Their existence was only hinted at through distant muffled cries, shadows glimpsed through windows, and the occasional fleeting glimpse of uneven, disturbing faces at the edge of the forest. Locals spoke of strange rituals, a never-ending cycle of marriages within the family, and the ominous belief that the Hollow itself would punish anyone who tried to intervene. The Whitmore's house, a sprawling mansion that had once been grand, now stood in a state of disrepair. Its windows were cracked and grimy, its roof sagging, and the paint peeled like dead skin. Inside, time seemed frozen. Dust-coated furniture, long abandoned meals, journals filled with meticulously recorded family rules, and photographs of children with uneven, grotesque features smiling in ways that sent chills down anyone's spine. Each generation's history told the same story: obedience enforced through fear, isolation from the outside world, and the inescapable pull of their own twisted bloodline. It was into this world that investigators, curious journalists, and trespassers stumbled, often leaving with more questions than answers. Few dared to step inside, and even fewer came back unchanged. Raven's Hollow was more than a town. It was a cage, a mausoleum, and a warning all at once. Every tree, shadow, and whisper of wind seemed to echo the same terrifying truth. Some families are cursed, and some children are trapped forever. The first real signs that something was terribly wrong in Raven's Hollow came not from locals, but from the faint rumors that reached the nearby towns. It began with disappearances, children, adolescents, and occasionally adults who had wandered too close to the hollow. Families reported their loved ones missing, only for investigators to discover cryptic, hastily scribbled notes on the edges of old maps or the occasional journal left behind in abandoned cabins. Each incident seemed to center around the Whitmore family, though the truth was nearly impossible to verify. Outsiders rarely survived encounters, and if they did, they often returned, changed, terrified, or incoherent. The most chilling of these early incidents involved a young journalist named Elliot Kane, who had ventured into Raven's Hollow after hearing whispers about a family living in complete isolation. Equipped with only a camera and a notebook, Elliot had expected a simple story about eccentric mountain folk. Instead, he stumbled upon the perimeter of the Whitmore estate and glimpsed children with grotesque, uneven faces staring from the shadows of broken windows. Their eyes were hollow, their foreheads slightly swollen, and their expressions were unnervingly vacant. Before Elliot could react, a figure, presumably one of the adult family members, appeared behind the children, prompting him to flee. Returning to town, Elliot tried to warn others, but his credibility was questioned. Locals whispered that the hollow itself drove people to hallucinate. He published fragmented accounts in local papers, but even those who read them felt an unshakable sense of dread. And yet, over the following months, the disappearances continued. Neighbors began noticing strange sounds at night, high-pitched cries, laughter that stopped abruptly, and the slow creak of floorboards long abandoned. The hollow seemed alive, and each incident painted a picture of a family whose control over its children was absolute and horrifying. The first incident was just the beginning. It was the spark that would ignite a series of discoveries, each more terrifying than the last. The children were not merely hidden, they were trapped, raised in a world where the mountains themselves conspired to keep them captive. Every investigation hinted at the same terrifying truth. Those who entered the hollow rarely left untouched, and the darkness surrounding the Whitmore family had only begun to reveal itself. The Whitmore family was the heart of Raven's Hollow's darkness, a lineage steeped in secrecy and unspeakable taboos. To the outside world, they were merely a name whispered with unease, but those who dared step inside the hollow quickly realized the horrifying reality. This was a family shaped and warped by generations of inbreeding, isolation, and obsession with their bloodline. The adults were grotesque mirrors of the children, their faces uneven, foreheads slightly swollen, eyes too large, and expressions twisted into unnerving smiles that never reached their hollow eyes. It was a living portrait of a family trapped in both time and morality. The children, raised under rigid control, were the clearest reflection of the family's darkness. They were isolated from sunlight, from any connection to the outside world, and yet trained to obey the cruelest of rules. Laughter was scarce, smiles were forced, and curiosity was punished. Those who glimpsed them described a surreal, haunting presence. Children with hollow eyes, unnaturally still postures, and subtle facial deformities, inherited and magnified from generation to generation. Their world was contained within crumbling walls, barred windows, and the endless forests surrounding the mansion, an ecosystem of fear and obedience. Inside the house, the Whitmore's routines were ritualistic and chilling. Family journals chronicled marriages between cousins and siblings, meticulous records of each child's birth, health, and obedience. Notes on behavior, meals, and punishments filled pages in perfect looping handwriting, evidence of obsessive control, and the family's unwavering dedication to bloodline purity. Visitors occasionally found disturbing photographs, portraits of children in old, tattered clothing, some in wedding dresses, their uneven faces frozen in eerie smiles. The lines of inbreeding were clear: swollen foreheads, asymmetric features, hollow eyes, all captured in black and white or sepia tones, as if the images themselves were a warning. Even more unnerving was the family's apparent calm in the presence of outsiders. Adults would observe intruders silently, their gaze cold and calculating, while the children watched from dark corners with an almost mechanical obedience. The Hollow had forged a family that feared nothing except the intrusion of the outside world. Yet its very existence was a living horror, a grotesque portrait of taboo and control. To truly understand Raven's Hollow, one had to confront the Whitmores directly, a task few survived and fewer understood. Investigators, journalists, and curious outsiders who ventured into Raven's Hollow soon realized that the house was more than a home. It was a labyrinth of horror. Every room seemed frozen in time, the air thick with dust, decay, and a lingering sense of dread. Behind locked doors, they discovered hidden journals, old photographs, and crudely barricaded passages that suggested the children were deliberately confined, never allowed outside, and meticulously monitored by their inbred elders. Some journals contained lists of punishments for curiosity, rebellion, or any attempt to escape, alongside chilling entries about the family's obsession with bloodline purity. One investigator, who dared to wander into the east wing of the mansion, described a corridor lined with dozens of tiny rooms, each containing a single bed, some with torn sheets and toys coated in dust. Shadowy figures, children, peeked from the doorways, their hollow eyes following every movement, their foreheads slightly swollen, their features uneven. They seemed more like living portraits of fear than real humans. On the walls, faded chalk marks recorded the passage of days, months, and even years, as if the family had been counting their confinement meticulously. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind through broken windows seemed alive, almost watching. The most disturbing discovery came when investigators stumbled upon a secret basement. Hidden beneath a false floor, it contained evidence of the family's darker practices: faded wedding attire for the children, ritualistic objects, and photographs of the children in arranged poses, sometimes next to each other, as though preparing for ceremonies too grotesque to be named. The children appeared calm, obedient, and frighteningly conditioned, their blank stares reflecting a life spent entirely within these walls. The air was thick with a sense of taboo. The basement seemed like the heart of a centuries-long nightmare, where innocence had been twisted into something horrifying. Every discovery in Raven's Hollow deepened the sense of dread. The mansion itself felt alive, an extension of the Whitmore family's control, protecting the children while trapping them in a world of fear. Each hidden journal, each photograph, and every corridor confirmed the same horrifying truth. The inbred children had been deliberately isolated, molded into shadows of their own bloodline, and imprisoned by generations of taboo and secrecy. To witness this was to confront a reality so dark, so unnatural, that few would ever speak of it without trembling. Just when investigators believed they had begun to understand the horrors of Raven's Hollow, the true darkness of the Whitmore family revealed itself. Hidden behind locked doors and forgotten hallways, they discovered evidence of relationships that defied every law and moral boundary, confirming decades of whispered rumors. The children, some barely teenagers, were not only isolated, but also forced into unnatural unions orchestrated by the adults, ensuring the continuation of the inbred bloodline. Photographs, journals, and faded marriage certificates painted a grotesque and undeniable portrait. Siblings married siblings, cousins married cousins, and generations were twisted into an endless cycle of taboo rituals. Even more horrifying was the realization that the children themselves had begun to accept their fate with unsettling calm, trained from birth to view these arrangements as normal. Investigators found tiny wedding garments meticulously preserved in basements, attesting to ceremonies performed in secrecy. Some of the children's diaries described obedience as the only way to survive, while simultaneously documenting the psychological torment and confusion that comes with loving someone who is a sibling. It was a dark education in submission, fear, and taboo, an indoctrination that had turned innocence into grotesque compliance. The shocking twist didn't stop there. As the investigators explored the mansion's upper floors, they stumbled upon a hidden room filled with photographs of missing children from nearby towns, each carefully labeled with dates and locations. It became clear that the Whitmores had not only confined their own children, but may have abducted outsiders to reinforce their twisted bloodline rituals. The walls themselves seemed to whisper secrets. The family had been operating in the shadows for decades, untouched by law or morality, their isolation serving both protection and control. For the outsiders who discovered this, the shock was suffocating. Ravens Hollow was not just a town, nor was it merely a home. It was a fortress of horror, a place where morality had been abandoned, and the darkest impulses of the human mind had been institutionalized. The investigators realized the children's distorted features, hollow eyes, and uneven faces were not just products of genetics. They were physical manifestations of generations of confinement, fear, and abuse. The Whitmore family's secrets were now laid bare, and the truth was more horrifying than anyone had imagined. The children were not just trapped by the walls of the mansion, but by a legacy of inbred darkness that consumed every generation. As the investigation deepened, the walls of Ravens Hollow seemed to close in on those who dared uncover its secrets. What had begun as a mission to understand quickly turned into a fight for survival. Late one night, while investigators combed through the decrepit house, they realized the Whitmore family wasn't just a ghost of the past. They were still there, watching. Footsteps echoed in the hallways, where no one was seen. Doors creaked shut on their own, and in the thick silence came the sound of children's laughter, distorted, hollow, and unearthly. The outsiders knew then that this house was not abandoned, but alive with something unnatural. One investigator described the sudden terror of being chased through the upper corridors by figures that were half real, half nightmare. The children, those pale, uneven-faced remnants of the bloodline, appeared in flashes, their eyes reflecting light like wild animals. They were silent at first, moving with unnatural speed, then began whispering in broken voices. "Stay, stay, forever." Panic set in as doors slammed shut, sealing corridors, and the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of mold and decay. Desperate to escape, the investigators tried breaking through boarded windows, only to find thick iron bars hidden behind the rotting wood, as if the house itself had been designed as a prison. One of them swore that the portraits on the walls began to move, the painted eyes following their every step. Another claimed that when they touched a door handle, it burned as though heated by fire, searing into their palm. Reality and nightmare blurred, trapping them in a maze of terror. But the most horrifying moment came when they stumbled into the cellar. The children stood there in the dim lantern light, silent, emotionless, their features grotesquely distorted. Behind them, scrawled on the walls in charcoal and blood, were the words, "No one leaves Raven's Hollow." The message wasn't just a warning, it was a curse. The Whitmores, both living and dead, had bound their bloodline and their house into a pact of eternal suffering. And anyone who dared to uncover the truth risked becoming part of that cursed legacy. The investigators realized they weren't just documenting a horror story. They were fighting to avoid becoming the next names on that wall of the missing. Escape was no longer a possibility. Survival itself had become uncertain. By the time the surviving investigators managed to claw their way out of Raven's Hollow, dawn had barely broken over the misty mountains. Their escape wasn't a triumph. It was a desperate scramble, leaving behind equipment, files, and even colleagues who were never seen again. The haunted mansion loomed behind them like a beast retreating into shadow, its windows glowing faintly as though the house itself had eyes. They carried with them more than just evidence. They carried scars, both physical and psychological, that would never heal. Authorities attempted to investigate further, but every effort to revisit the hollow ended in failure. Equipment malfunctioned, vehicles broke down on the winding dirt roads, and those who entered the mansion reported hallucinations, missing time, or worse, never returning at all. Raven's Hollow became an unspoken place on maps, a town that didn't exist, erased by silence and fear. The Whitmore family was never officially documented, and the missing children's files vanished into locked cabinets marked as unsolved. It was as though the entire bloodline and its horrors had been absorbed into the cursed soil itself. For those who survived, nightmares followed. They spoke of children's distorted faces appearing in mirrors, of whispers calling their names in the dead of night, of waking to find muddy footprints at the foot of their beds. It was clear that Raven's Hollow had not let them go. It had simply allowed them to leave with a piece of its curse inside them. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, leaving them forever bound to what they had witnessed. The story of the Whitmore family, of inbred children trapped in darkness and ritual, became more than a tale of true crime. It became a warning. Some say the mansion still stands, its walls pulsing with the screams of those trapped inside. Others whisper that the bloodline continues in secret, scattered in forgotten corners of Appalachia, waiting for the next generation of innocents to stumble too close. And so Raven's Hollow lives on, not just as a place, but as a legend, a shadow etched into the history of America's darkest corners. A cursed bloodline, a haunted house, and a truth so horrifying that even time itself seems eager to bury it. But the curse of Raven's Hollow is not buried. It is waiting,